Welcome to the Seed Farmer Podcast, the podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tournesol Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing and using your own seeds. As we wrap up this year, I want to do something a little bit different. At the end of every Seed Farmer conversation, I ask my guests two questions. The first is, what would you tell your younger seed-growing self? And the second is, what would you say to market growers to inspire them to start growing seed? I think the answers they give are really wonderful, and I often think about them afterwards, and I've been thinking about just taking those answers together to put them into one episode. And so that's what this episode is. It's the words of advice for seed people from episodes 1 through 10. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer podcast and find it's a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/support podcast. And I want to say an extra thing about supporting a podcast like this. I do have folks who support the podcast with one-time donations and monthly donations, but currently these don't quite cover all the expenses to edit the episodes and get it out on a weekly basis. Without mentioning the time that goes into organizing the show, preparing the conversations, and the conversations themselves. I do love this work, but I do mention this also so that you know that your financial support really makes a difference. So if you have thought about supporting the podcast, it does make a difference. And I also really appreciate all the other ways that you support the show. When you share your favorite episodes with farmers, friends, family, when you tell people about the show, and when you leave 5-star reviews and comments and even the emails that you send. So all that support really makes a difference. And now, words of advice for seed people. Let's start with Frank Morton from Wild Garden Seed. Frank has been one of the most influential people in my seed growing learning and experience, and I know I'm not the only one. So let's hear what words of advice he has.
The problem with this question is that it assumes that the young person will listen. If I told myself in 1995, hey, don't try to do too much. You should figure out what you're going to work on and become an expert at that. And don't try to do everything, because you will just drive yourself crazy trying to be everything to everyone. In fact, would I have listened to that advice? No, it was actually given to me. As a young guy, my friend John Navazio. Ever since, we started talking seeds in 1996, he has always said to me, become a samurai of the crops that you are most invested in. Don't try to do everything. Furthermore, it's not how much seed you keep, it's how much seed you throw away. Navazio told me that 5 times every time we met up with each other. And that was sage advice from older seed keepers. I didn't listen to it. I proceeded to go ahead and do everything that interested me, I did native seeds. Navazio says, what are you doing that for? I said, oh, that's God's work. We got to do that. I did native seeds. I did vegetable seeds. I did, chicory and lettuce and squash and just onions all over the map. Was that a good idea? I'm not sure, I would tell myself, don't do corn. Just don't do it, Frank. Just don't do corn. You don't know anything about it. You're not in a corn place. And furthermore, even if you came up with the world's greatest corn, you couldn't make any money selling corn seed. So forget it. Somebody should have told me that. I wasted years trying to do corn. And then one day I just said, forget it. And when I composted all those ears with their, numbers written on them and everything, all I could think about was how much time I wasted doing that. However, if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have the perspective I have today. And I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know what I just told you. So, I think that old people offering young people advice is a nice thing to do. But I don't know. Seed people are pretty independent. They're mostly going to do what they want to do. You just can't make young people skip the steps. You can't get them to skip the steps. Let me tell you how to save yourself a lot of trouble, It reminds me of the song. If you want to get in trouble, I'll tell you how to do it. Just get a guitar and then you're into it. Well, that's sort of how seeds are, If you want to have a lot of fun, I'll tell you how to do it. Get into seeds.
If you're paying attention, you'll notice that Frank is actually episode 7 of the Seed Farmer podcast. So we've begun on a nonlinear note. From here on, we're mostly going to go linear. So next up is words of advice from episodes 1 through 3. We have Adrianna and Joelene with Empowered Flowers, followed by Marie-Claude Comeau, who at the time of this episode, her farm was called La Radicule. Now it is Semences St-Laurent. And then Kristyn Leach of Second Generation Seeds.
I think I would say to myself, be patient. Be patient and take your wins where you have them. I was talking earlier, I took our not meeting our seed contract last year as a failure, and it really wasn't. It was a really successful year for us, and we produced really high quality seed that now a lot of other people get to grow. Being patient with yourself and taking your wins where you have them, I think, is good advice for any grower.
Seed or otherwise.
Seed or otherwise, yeah. And I think the thing of being patient is about being observant. I think a lot of times it feels like as a grower, I don't feel like I have enough time. And so I'm kind of trying to rush through something. And really, the more time that I take to be observant, the more successful and productive I can be, actually. So being patient enough to follow the process through, to observe and think about it, makes me a better grower every time. I would say it's a gift. It is a gift to see plants through their entire life cycle.
And it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to follow a plant through its whole life cycle and collect that seed and say, maybe your lettuce is crossed and you have the seed and then you plant it out again and you think you're going to get like a red lettuce, but you get like this red green lettuce or something. You can kind of create your own crosses too with things, create your own varieties in your own garden. And that's kind of fun.
There's a lot of joy and excitement in integrating seed production, whether it's for yourself and on your farm or on seed contracts or for starting a seed business, like whatever it is, it's new and exciting and a dynamic element of learning.
And that's kind of the old way is people saved their tomato seed and gave it to their neighbors or, that's the way they do seed swapping a lot, right? That's kind of the old. Seed wasn't as available.
Spilling seeds, it's gonna happen. And there's no use crying over spilled seeds, is what I would say. It's my take on the famous quote. I mean, you're gonna drop seed buckets and it's gonna happen, and your seeds are gonna get some kind of disease that you don't know what it is at some point, and I started farming and I was like, oh, my fields are not gonna have any weeds and I won't have any disease, and no, it's gonna happen, and so just it's normal. I think it's just like starting small and growing from there. If it's something that you like doing, and you should find a project that excites you, and then find a seed company that's out there that's also interested in the project that excites you, and start a conversation and build a relationship. If you're saving seeds, as I said earlier, if you're saving seeds for yourself, you probably have more than you need. So why not grow a little bit more to share with your neighbors, other farmers or other seed companies.
I would say, like, thinking about seed, I would probably tell my younger self to just like have more patience. And I think you can feel so much enthusiasm, like, oh, look how much you just love so many different plants. You want to kind of do all the things. But I think I would just sort of remind myself to have patience, and just think of it like with any sort of deep friendship, like, you know, getting to know one plant, like, to a certain degree, like, is enough of a challenge. So I think it's just sort of like to just really take your time and savor just kind of that process. I mean, there's lots of things, like, as you grow familiar with different crops, like I look back on pictures from like my first years of farming, and you just see nothing but mistakes. Like, there's some times where I think like, oh, like things have just gotten harder. But then when I look back, I'm like, it's like things have gotten harder in a lot of ways. And also just like the more you love something, the more you can kind of see like any minor sign of stress. And, you know, when I look at old photo albums and stuff, I'm like, oh, couldn't you tell, like this, you know, that cucumber was stressed, you're overwatering it, or, you know, this thing needs more water, or, you know, oh, that needed, you know, that's showing signs of disease and things you just couldn't really know. But in some ways, I wouldn't tell my younger self any of that, because I just think it would spoil so much of just like the slow pace of that journey. Like, you know, there's so much that the joy is just, just making and learning from those mistakes. And yeah, I would just say, just, you know, kind of just take your time and try to be as sort of devoted and attentive, you know, as possible. I would say just do it. You know, like, I think there's a lot of things that feel intimidating about it, but I think that, you know, like, I just think that being a seedy person, the attentiveness that it like provokes or asks of you, and the accountability to just care for, you know, a plant many times beyond like what it just, you know, when it's most profitable or when you're kind of reaping a benefit from some part of it, like, I think just gives you a more holistic relationship that, feels honest. It feels like you'll grow as a farmer, and just as like in your decency as a person. It just builds character, and you just get to be filled with awe. And I think that just in the grind, every small scale farmer, you know, it's like, I know everybody has the May meltdown, and, you know, just to have something that demands, like, again, like just kind of like a focus, and for you to have to muster up, like, taking notes and making observations. Like, I think it becomes like a type of practice that gives you unexpected opportunities to just like experience, just the sheer awe of kind of just how magical it is that plants are doing any of the like millions of things that they're doing at any given time. You get to say, like, I'm putting on a seed saving hat and a scientist hat, and it gives you an excuse to just like, you know, stare at your plants more often. You know, like, I think it just, it deepens the appreciation you'll feel, the responsibility you'll feel for them, and the things that you'll get to learn from them. You know, if you're questioning, well, a seed packet like is $4, you know, compared to, the time and energy it takes to save the seed, you know, $4 doesn't seem incredibly impactful, to have to negotiate in terms of just purchases for your farm. But if you think about there's just all the other things that come along with that seed, the better if you do a trial or you do any sort of seed saving and improvement on your farm, getting to know those seeds, like in some way teaches you about like the architecture of the system on your farm and how to better optimize things. And so then suddenly, if you start thinking about like being able to use less water, using less fertilizer, you have crops that are like really, really kind of, even inadvertently, you're selecting for just things that thrive with all the idiosyncrasies of your farming system, then it does, become economically meaningful as well. So I think it's, there's probably a whole other conversation. A lot of people you've talked to touched on just how challenging it can be to be a commercial seed producer or contractor. But even if you're just doing it for the sake of your own farm, I think it can be, just one of the more important, economic levers to activate for like your farm's economic efficiency.
Now we'll have some words from episodes 4, 6, and 8. We already heard 7 at the beginning, so don't worry about that. And episode 5 is coming up shortly. Let's start with Annie and Nathaniel of Deep Harvest Farm, then Helen Skiba of Artemis Flower Farm, and Liz and Matthew of Muddy Fingers Farm.
I would tell ourselves to start going to the organic seed conference earlier, and start, building those relationships with seed growers and, seed folks in our region as soon as possible, because those relationships have been totally invaluable to us. It's a tight-knit community, really open-hearted and super knowledgeable, and it's small, and they'll welcome anyone in, and the earlier that you can start those relationships, the better. And we started that fairly early on, but for folks who are interested in getting into this work, that is like as good a place to start as any.
Yeah, and going so far as not just having a friendship, but maybe even pursuing a job with one of these folks. We jumped in, in our late 20s in our farm careers, and we were a little anxious just to hit the ground running, because whereas a lot of folks start in their early 20s or late teens as farm interns or woofers or seasonal workers, we didn't want to spend several years doing that. So we kind of jumped right into our own business, and then ended up making a lot of the mistakes ourselves that we probably could have made on other people's farms just by watching, or watch them make the mistakes, that is. And so had I been able to go back, I maybe would have prioritized at least a year on another seed farm, one of the wild garden seeds or adaptive seeds or uprising or Siskiyou seeds, one of the many awesome kind of regional, really farmer-led, organic, open pollinated, value-based seed companies that we have in our area, and learn from them. I mean, we've tried to play catch up through emails and phone calls and building these relationships after the fact and learning as much as we can from them. But it would have been great to have a season with one of these who we see as our mentors, and who we really look up to and are inspired by. But other than that, I think we did it okay. We never got burnt out. We never took on too much at one time. So just piecing one thing in at a time, not taking on too many contracts your first year, not trying too many varieties for packet sales your first year, but just taking things slowly. And I think we did that, and I think we benefited greatly from it.
I find it incredibly gratifying and empowering to have your own source of seed that you grew, that you are sure is, something that you like and feel good about and enjoy, and that you don't have to, cross your fingers is available in the next season for you to be able to grow again. It's a definite source of empowerment, and it's a source of beauty on your farm, because taking things to seed is a whole different visual experience and emotional experience, and a longer relationship with a plant.
I would say, just to jump in on a small scale, maybe just try without even getting a contract, but just choose a variety that you grow a lot of, that you direct seed a lot of, maybe like an annual plant like an arugula or a spinach, and maybe you plant a bed of that and harvest the first half for food for your CSA, and let the second half go to seed and harvest it in August for seed, and just see how it goes.
Yeah, and one last thing that I would say is just make sure that you do your due diligence with talking to seed growers in your area before taking on contracts, because there are a lot of seed companies that are just really scrounging for growers, and they won't necessarily do the research for you in terms of what's going to work well on your farm in your area. So just, reach out to that seed growing community in your region before really taking on contracts yourself, because folks, your friends and people in your area will be able to let you know if that's going to work well or not if you haven't, practiced it yourself.
Yeah. The tomato and eggplant contract in Northwest Washington probably isn't the best place to start. So,
I mean, I would just say do more. Save more, go for it. And learn as much as you can, and go ahead and read those books and go to those conferences and just do it. I think that I'm the kind of person who I have sort of analysis paralysis, right? I think about things too much and then I decide not to do the thing, or I think so much that I talk myself out of doing it. And so I would just tell myself, you got to get over it, like do the thing and save the seed, because really it's just an experiment every time, and it's a beautiful experiment. And so I would just say go for it and save as much as you can and see what happens, and plant it out and see if it's better, see if it's in any way like more adapted to the climate or a better variety or whatever. And, I'm going to take that advice this year and sort of see what I can do with maybe some zinnias and some snapdragons too, just because I want to see, I want to see what happens. And I want to experience the full life cycle of those plants. When I first saw a snapdragon go to seed, doesn't often happen because I'm cutting every stem, but I did let some go to seed last year. And just the form of the seed pod is so weird. And I learned actually that the seed pod is why it has its scientific name. Its scientific name is Antirrhinum majus. And antirrhinum means big nose, or calf's nose, the nose of a calf, like a baby cow, and in Latin. And so the seed pod has these two holes in it. So it's sort of a round little pod, little puffball. And then it's got these two round holes on it that sort of look like a little nose. And it's adorable. And there's so many seeds in there in each little capsule. And I just really kind of fell in love with it. So I'm really considering trying some open pollinated snaps at some point, and trying to save seed from those. And because I assume they're pretty self-pollinating, given the form of the flower. So anyway, yes, I would just say try it all, do as much as you can, and learn as fast as you can. Oh man, well, for cut flower growers, I would just say it is so easy. Like, it's basically just the next step. You don't have to really do anything else to start doing this. And the seed that you get is going to be so much more special to you. And, it's going to be grown on your farm with your practices. And it's going to be so much better than what you can get even from the best seed companies that aren't in your region. And just the process of doing it is very meditative. It's very, it's just very fulfilling, empowering, very cyclical. It feels like you're doing the right thing. It feels like the right thing to do. And so I just want people to have that feeling. It's so worth it. And then, for veg growers, on our farm, veggies and flowers grow together. And so it's just sort of natural for us to want to grow seed and want to have those varieties that are really adapted to our climate. And I think, the process of growing vegetables for seed is even more magical sometimes, because sometimes it takes so long, to save that
carrot or the onions or brassicas, right? Save them, overwinter them, in storage, and then plant them out in the spring. And then, and selecting the roots, over the when you're harvesting, and then watching that plant do the thing that it is meant to do is just, it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful in so many different ways. And so for me, like watching our vegetable grower friends grow seed is also, it's just the right thing. It's just got to be done too, so that we have more food sovereignty, more seed sovereignty, just more adapted varieties that we can really rely on. As we know, we can't be dependent on really the supply chain. We've learned that, over COVID and throughout the aftermath of that.
Well, I guess I would say, just give it a try. The only problem is that I think when we're younger, like we always have been committed to growing vegetables for people, and that's our main goal. And so I think it's hard because when we were younger and just starting out, like that was all we could manage. Like, we didn't need another enterprise on our farm. But I would just say, just give it a shot. I guess for somebody starting out, grow a couple things either for yourself or commercially even.
I would say that I feel like local, small scale, appropriate varieties of seed for organic production is sort of the missing link in the local food system. And so you don't have to grow every seed you're going to use on your farm, but if everybody grew a couple of varieties, we could have a really solid base of local growers of local seed for local farmers. To me, that's like the missing link in the food system. I feel like we've got a really good base of like small farms growing food for people, but what we are dependent on is like big giant corporations who grow seed in dry climates, choosing what varieties are available. So I just think that that's like another level of food security that we can provide for each other if people, try it out and grow a couple of varieties of seed.
The one thing that I was thinking is the one thing that's been most that I really don't know the questions I don't know how to answer, as somebody who's new to commercial seed growing. I've grown vegetables for a long time, and I have an idea of what to expect from a bed of carrots, what kind of yield I can expect and what kind of income I can expect from a bed of carrots. But as far as growing seed, it's just really hard to know what kind of yield can I expect from this crop, especially when you're talking about something as variable as a tiny flower seed or a fairly large bean seed. The volume, the weight is going to be so much different from crop to crop. And, what can you expect as far as dollars per pound or per ounce to expect from a seed company? It's just really hard to figure out, the yield and what kind of income you can expect from any particular crop. Especially if you're growing something different each year. That's been kind of our biggest challenge, I think, as far as growing seed commercially, because you wanted to compare somewhat favorably to your better vegetable crops. You don't want to be losing money on them. So, I just don't know. It's hard to know where to find that information as somebody who's new to the seed growing world.
And that brings us to episode 9 and 10, the last two episodes of the first season of the Seed Farmer podcast. Episode 9 is Robin Tunnicliffe of Sea Bluff Farm. And then we have Chris and Owen of True Love Seeds. I do also want to mention that Chris and Owen host the Seeds and Their People podcast. So if you're looking for some good CD listening, they definitely fit the bill.
One of my first times saving chard and getting these huge buckets and just thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be like $50,000 of seed. I'm going to be rich. Like I can retire on this bucket of seed. And then I realized, oh, I can't sell it all in packets, can I? So I think I initially thought that it was going to be a very lucrative business. So I quickly learned, oh gosh, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But I think we went through this process because we thought we were going to build this big seed empire. When we realized how much you could get off seeds, holy smokes, this is going to be huge. And then we really had to do a recheck of our expectations. But I think to talk to my younger self was just to realize how much incredible satisfaction and how much of a contribution and all of those values and how much it's added to our farm and how we can do incredible things in the winter that we couldn't have done without it. So to really just keep in mind that it's not failure, that it's success in a different package, and it has contributed so much to the overall economic productivity of the farm, but it looks different. And then it's just a long process. It takes time and it takes a lot of reflection. It's always a thinking game for me. And, just in this podcast, realizing, oh yeah, that Russell experiment, it's not a total bust. It's, partial. So it's a humbling process, and there's tons of success in it. And it's just a bit harder to see sometimes. I think they should pick a crop that is meaningful to them. And, the chard was something that really hit home to me. And then just start working with it. And in a few short years, you can make a real difference in a crop. And then just start small. Just start and do one crop really well. And then you can start expanding. I think it's tempting to do a lot of varieties, but it's very valuable to do one or two really well and then build from there.
I would get myself ready for seed keeping. It's something that it's a different kind of challenge. I mean, I've always known that I wanted to grow food. I've always known that I wanted, somehow to be involved in agriculture or at least botany. But I was not initially prepared, I think, for that delicate balance of being a market and production farmer as well as a seed keeper. And again, we do say seed keeping, and we say that very, intentionally, because we believe that, we're, of course, saving the seed, the biological material, but we're also saving and lifting up and placing, in the context of the seed, the stories, the lore, the ritual, the songs, all of that with the seed. And so I think I probably to my younger self would tell myself, hey, you have a important food culture here. You need to recognize it. And you need to start thinking about how you will manage this balance of growing food for market as well as for seed keeping, because I don't think I was initially prepared for it. And it certainly has taken some years to get into the groove where it is a normal thing now.
I would agree with that piece. I'm trying to think of who my younger seed keeping self was. My first time was with marigold seeds when I was a teenager. And I worked on a production farm in Connecticut in 2012 and did some seed keeping there. I think what I would want my younger self to know is just that, seed keeping is such an intimate relationship with the plants that we're that we grow, and to just like really get excited for that intimacy and getting to know what those plants are like from seed to seed. You really pay attention to them as they flower and as they start to develop seeds, and you learn as much from them as you can from any other source. You know, you can supplement that learning with books and conversations with people, but the plants tell you so much about when they're ready for, you know, their seed to be harvested and so on, and how they need to be treated to get to that point. And then of course the cultural piece is what really, for me, got me hooked. So, you know, I would tell my younger self to think about where these plants came from before they ended up in your garden, who cared for them for the last 10,000 years. What is their significance to other people? So I think those two things.
You know, in keeping with our tradition and true love, I would, you know, we're always encouraging people to dig into their own story. And so the very first thing I would say is, I would ask is, what are the foods and the crops that have been important to the survival of your ancestors and that contributed to your being here? And what are the ways that you think that you could come closest to honoring that, you know, that story of your life and of your survival? And so that's the first thing that I would ask people to do. You know, because then you place it within a deeper context, and a context that has something to do with your own story, and how that story is shared with so many other people. And that's a gift to the world. It's a gift to everybody, I think, particularly in this very multicultural, multi-ethnic society that is struggling since its inception with how to be a diverse nation, you know, how to be a place where everyone's culture is not only valuable, but necessary, you know, to this social experiment, you know, that we call the U.S. And so that's the first thing. But then, you know, sort of on a ground level, I think I would tell folks to start slow, you know, and start by thinking about growing, you know, maybe just one crop for seed keeping at first, you know, and as you find ways to really, because I think isolation, you know, sort of isolating the plants so that they don't cross is one of the, you know, it was one of the hardest things for me as a market farmer, you know, making sure that I'm growing, you know, because we have limited space, particularly if you're growing in cities, you have limited space, and you're growing a whole lot of different crops, and a lot of them are related to one another, you know. So I would tell folks first and foremost, you know, sort of bone up on your education around what plant families sort of constitute, you know, the nation of your garden, you know. So that's the first thing. You need to know that this sweet pepper is related, you know, because it's Capsicum annuum to this other sweet pepper, but it's more distantly related, you know, to maybe a pimento pepper, you know, Capsicum chinensis, or frutescens, you know. And so that's the other thing that I would say is sort of, you know, really make sure that you have a deep understanding of plant families and sort of the genetic possibilities and so start small and work your way up.
And now that brings us to episode 5. I told you we weren't going to forget about it. Episode 5 is Rowan White of Sierra Seeds, and I thought she would be a great person to wrap us up on these words of advice for seed people. I do have one note about this recording. At one point, you'll start to hear some birds in the background. After Rowan and I finished recording, I commented on them. And she said, I thought they were on your side. And I was like, oh. And then I realized I had another tab open on the computer and the sound was coming from there. So it's a little bit embarrassing. I wondered if I should go back to the original files for this and try to clean it up. But I decided I would honor the original conversation. So here's Rowan with the final words of advice for seed people for this episode.
I think I'd tell her to just continue to just be patient. I mean, so much of seed work is slow work, you know, it's beautiful and just honing. I mean, I think there was just a natural inherent patience that you develop as you know, when you apprentice yourself to seeds and to food. And I think back over the last 25 years of being in relationship to seed, and I think there was, many of those years where I was a young mother and juggling a lot and doing a lot. And so I think, probably what I would tell her would be just to slow down and enjoy the moment. But, again, when you're a mom and you're chasing toddlers and you're doing this and that, it's kind of hard. But I think, we did the best we could. But I think largely I've grown myself into the type of person who at 17 I really needed in my life. And because I did apprentice myself a lot to seeds and a lot to other humans too, but I've done my best to grow myself into somebody who can work with young people, in that very formative stage of their life as teenagers and young adults who want to get into this work and perhaps be a good mentor and a good guide for them. Being able to find even just one variety or a couple of ways in which you can close those loops inside of your whole farm system to save seeds, I think maybe this sounds like esoteric, but it brings a different energy to the farm, and it brings a different relationship between you and a more engaged relationship between you and that plant, because I always say we're plant midwives. We're sort of stewarding plants from one generation to the other. And so there is you're engaging in reciprocity and in a beautiful, engaged, coevolutionary relationship to seeds. And even if it's just one or two varieties, you're deepening your connection not only to that seed, but to the land itself, and being able to sort of see the life cycles of these plants. And again, engage in that reverent curiosity for all the different shapes and ways they grow beyond that sort of harvestable stage as a vegetable or a flower or an herb. And I think you just gain an increased sense of reverence for, I guess, just the power of the life cycle of a seed and the power of a seed and the inherent benevolence and generosity of a seed. And so I think every farm should have at least one or two crops that they steward from seed to seed each year and have a part of their farm collection. And I imagine, I think you're one of those folks, Dan, is that you start with one or two, and then pretty soon, you kind of get, caught by the seed saving or seed keeping bug. It really kind of grows on you and it deepens that connection to the work that you're doing. So I would just invite folks to at least try, even if it's just something simple and easy, to integrate one or two seed crops into their seasonal cycles. In closing, I just think it's so important. A large part of my work is about inspiring the love and the heart of this, right? The love and the connection and kinship and relationship that we have to this work. And each and every one of us descends from people who, you have ancestors in your lineage who kept seeds and saved seeds and had a relationship to seeds. And perhaps those varieties of foods played roles in your cosmology or your ceremonies or your stories from whomever your people are, in your lineages. And so as we work together to envision and build a more irresistible future of food with seeds playing an important foundational part of it, what are the ways in which we can draw upon and rehydrate and reconnect people just like you and me to that ancestral connection to seed? I always say that people they carry in their blood and their bones the agreements that their ancestors made with seed a long time ago. And so it's important to remember that if we ate today, or if you're growing seed in your garden, that those seeds never stopped caring for you. They always upheld their side of the agreement to take care of you and to take care of us as humans. And so what are the ways in which we as living humans now who want to contribute to a more just and beautiful and equitable seed and food system, what are the ways in which we're engaging in reciprocity and care with the seeds, that we grow and in our midst? And sometimes we find those connections through ancestral ways, and sometimes it's just through our multiple senses and our excitement and our, as a pleasure activism and the way that we love engaging with food and seed, but just to try and find those meaningful connections and reweave ourselves back into those meaningful relationships with seed and food, because that is actually what is going to create a more sustainable revolution of the food system that we have now, is that if people care and people love these seeds as relatives and love the earth as mother. And so that's my vision and hope for the seed commons, is that people, non-native people especially, continue to do the work to understand what it means to be in kinship with seeds.
And that brings us to the end of this Seed Farmer podcast episode. If you like these words of advice for seed people, please let me know. And if you want to hear more episodes like this, also please let me know. And no matter where you are on your seed journey, I wish you success. Thank you to Semences et Dalton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at semencesetdalton.com. Thank you to Molly Brisebois for editing this episode, and thank you so much for listening. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, A Complete Guide to Growing, Using, and Selling Your Own Seed. And you can support the podcast at spreadsheet.farm/supportpodcast. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now is the time. You wouldn't want to miss any more words of advice for seed people. Until then, happy farming.